Welcome back. I'm Alfred Lambremont Webre, and this is Exopolitics TV. And we have the great privilege today to be with Kevin Annett, the Field Secretary of the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. Welcome, Kevin.
Hello, Alfred. Good to be with you on this very historic day.
Yes, I understand that we have some breaking news in the matter of the People versus Bergoglio et al., which is in the International Common Law Court of Justice at Brussels. Could you bring us up to date?
Yes, Alfred. The verdict was decided on yesterday by the magistrates in chamber. The verdict was that all three defendants are guilty as charged, and they are sentenced to life imprisonment in absentia. Now, the decision was just issued, we just got it today, and it's a very interesting decision because, first of all, there was one dissenting opinion. They were all united in the verdict that there was overwhelming, irrefutable evidence about the personal guilt of the Archbishop of Canterbury, the present Pope Francis, and the head of the Jesuits in these child trafficking and murderous activities. And on the basis of a doctrine called pro confesso, now this is really interesting. It's pro confesso is when, in a very important case, a defendant simply refuses to plea. And on that basis, they are assumed to have admitted to all of the charges brought against them. Now, the most important historic example of this was when King Charles I was tried in England as a criminal head of state. That is, he was conducting a war of aggression against his own people. He was causing the death of his own people, which is certainly relevant to this case. And on the basis of him refusing to issue a plea, the High Court in England that was established by the people in Parliament ruled that he was guilty on the basis of entering no plea, that he was not contesting the charges brought against him and therefore guilty. Now, that was initially the basis on which the magistrates found these three defendants guilty. But one of the magistrates dissented, and this is on a YouTube posting that's up at ITCCS.org and is being circulated today. And the dissenting opinion said, let me read from one of the, it said, quote, "The overwhelming guilt of these leaders for unspeakable crimes demands that we convict them not simply on the basis of a technicality, but according to the evidence alone, so that their guilt is crystal clear to the world and to posterity." And so, on that basis, the verdict was modified a bit. And let me just summarize the points. Not only were they found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, sworn sheriffs of the court and the direct action units were ordered to immediately arrest all three of them and to seize their property and assets. There are going to be arrest warrants issued within 48 hours. And also because of that minority opinion, the court will produce a public statement making it clear that these defendants were convicted on the basis of the evidence, the hard evidence of their guilt, and their refusal to plea was a contributing factor, but it wasn't the basis of the guilty sentence. And here's the other important announcement, that one of the reasons the verdict came in now is because the court frankly recognized it was beyond their means to successfully prosecute this enormous crime. They could hold these three accountable, but the crime is so much bigger. The crime of child trafficking, ritual sacrifice, these things that the evidence that we've begun to surface. So what they're doing is, as of September 1st, the court is establishing a permanent inquiry to investigate and prosecute those involved in these crimes. And they're calling it the Permanent Commission into Child Trafficking and Ritual Sacrifice. They are asking for the help of the world for this. They're not going to do it on their own. They're asking others involved in it, even governments, police forces, and others, to assist in stopping forever this ritual killing and trafficking of children. Now, and the final part of that decision is, in other words, this is an ongoing case. The evidence and the witnesses who come forward so far are relevant to this ongoing investigation, so they're not going to release open the court record yet until this commission has begun, at least, because it's definitely pertinent. Those witnesses and the evidence are going to be used in the ongoing investigation. So that was basically the decision, and they concluded the case. So it's a very important step, because it's like really a springboard to hopefully more effective action on stopping these crimes.
Right. Now, we're going to publish links to that decision in the description to this video interview. And I know that our audience really, the court must have had probable cause to initiate, or at least the prosecutors must have had probable cause to initiate this proceeding in the first place, and there's plenty of prima facie evidence. Could you go through and just list some of the evidence that has become public to this point so that people who are tuning in for the first time really understand that what the dissenting justice at least was referring to, so that they could have reached not only a pro confesso judgment, but a judgment of guilty,
Right.
in effect, a unanimous verdict of guilty of aiding and abetting crimes against humanity, including murder and human trafficking, personal involvement in this, and the guilt proven beyond any reasonable doubt beyond the prosecution. We really need some specifics here, Kevin.
Right. Well, the specifics are numerous, actually. Let's start, first of all, with there's two aspects of this. There's the institutional aspect and the personal aspect, the individual involvement of these defendants in these things. The institutional evidence is considerable. Things such as the proven program within the Catholic Church of trafficking children, especially under regimes of military dictatorship, like Franco's dictatorship, where over 300,000 children were trafficked. Many of them disappeared. Jorge Bergoglio's involvement as well, from eyewitnesses who are on the court record, saying that he did the same thing in Argentina in the 1970s and 80s on behalf of the military junta. There have even been priests who've come forward naming his involvement in that. And one of the key witnesses, of course, in this last case was an actual civil servant from the Argentine junta who described being in on meetings where Bergoglio arranged this on behalf of the church. There is the considerable amount of evidence we brought in from the first case as well. In referring to, in the case of the Indian residential schools in Canada, clearly it was established by a system set up by the Jesuits. Its whole purpose was to traffic children. And in recent cases, in the conviction, for example, of Monsignor William Lynn in a Philadelphia court, it was established in that case alone that even in just Philadelphia, in his diocese, over 1/4 of the Catholic priests were active participants in child trafficking, which totally belies and contradicts the Pope's recent statement that only 2% of priests are involved as child rapists. The reality is that the institution as a whole is set up not only to protect child rapists, and you're obligated to do that as a priest under the doctrine of crimen solicitanis, but actively traffics these children as part of a global system. That kind of strong evidence from that, first of all, kind of launched the case. As we got into the case, eyewitnesses began to come forward. People like Toos Nienhuis, a retired lawyer in Belgium, whose name we can't mention, is part of the sealed court record right now. She also gave testimony describing the involvement of this criminal body, Drangheta, who have acting as a middleman to provide children for these sacrificial rituals. Other eyewitnesses seeing all of the defendants at some of these rituals and describing in detail their involvement and the names and dates, places that actually corroborated the statements of Toos Nienhuis of where these killings were going on. That and other evidence which will be eventually released, but again as part of the sealed aspect of this court record. So it's one of those things being as well some of the documents that were shared from within the Vatican referring to this Ninth Circle sacrificial cult that apparently goes back several centuries. Now, all of that together, clearly, it wasn't just a case of where there's smoke, there's fire. There was that combination that we established in Canada of hard documentation of historical experience and eyewitnesses all together created what obviously the judges felt was a open and shut case.
Right. So what does what the court did then was to establish an ongoing commission which is as of September 1st, 2014. Could you go into that more in detail?
Well, yes, it's and in fact, frankly, I had, now that I'm more free to talk about this case, from the beginning, I was urging the judges to not just simply try to take this on themselves, but to set a much broader basis for this inquiry, because it is so huge. It's global. Other people and groups, including right within government systems, honest prosecutors, have been tracing this child trafficking network and coming across exactly the same kind of evidence we have involving a satanic aspect. And so they basically acted on that recommendation and said, look, this is too big for us. We have to make this a more public and ongoing investigation. One court case in itself isn't going to even begin to address this. We consider this a groundbreaking case, and we hope that once the evidence is all out, other courts and prosecutors can use that evidence to go after others involved. Now, the other aspect of that, why it was necessary, is we realized that we're up against a massive criminal syndicate, not simply the Catholic Church, but 'Ndrangheta, which is the largest criminal body in Italy and probably Europe, revenue in the over 70 billion euros every year from not just laundering money and extortion and corruption of politicians and that, and the drug trafficking, but human trafficking. And so to take on that kind of organization, obviously you need something more than a poorly funded volunteer movement of a common law court. You need professionals involved, and this is really the basis for trying to extend this into a permanent commission of inquiry.
Now, the local slang term for Ndrangheta is the octopus, and you've spoken to a retired Dutch lawyer who's for a woman lawyer whose former husband is a member of that criminal syndicate that provides the children and adolescents that are used in ritualistic, quote, hunting parties. We featured evidence and an interview with you, which I imagine is part of the evidence before the International Common Law Court of Justice, where infants are provided for the initiation of popes into the ninth circle so that they can ritually assassinate and then consume the blood and perhaps the flesh of these infants. And not only that, where royal families under a treaty protection of the popes can engage in hunting parties, like the former Prince of the Netherlands, where they hunt these adolescents. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, this was a series of Skype interviews. I did 3 of them, actually, with this retired lawyer in Holland right now. Now, I plan to see this person within the next couple of weeks, and the person has agreed to actually have those films released. She's willing to go public. And so that will be available as evidence, hopefully during August, no later than the middle of August, once that can be arranged. So let me just kind of sum up what she was saying. She's basically, her husband is a member of Ndrangheta, and she's able to have that inside knowledge because what they do is they blackmail judges, lawyers, politicians by having them participate in these events. They're told they're going to parties. Next thing they know, they're witnessing the hunting of these children. It's all filmed, and they're blackmailed and made to provide political and legal protection for Ndrangheta. This is how she was a witness. So she's useful to them alive because of that. She witnessed this happen in a very organized way. She said in the forest just outside Brussels, when this one incident occurred in 2004 that she witnessed, the whole area had been hemmed off and guarded by Belgian soldiers. And the participants that day included George Soros, who was a personal friend of the wife of this Prince Friso, the youngest brother of the present King of Holland, who was killed in the hospital in 2013 because he was a witness. And apparently he was going to start talking with a guilty conscience of some of this stuff. So George Soros, Prince Albert of Belgium, several other fairly high-ranking people, including the Prime Minister of Holland, Mark Rutte. She was naming all of these people. And what was really abhorrent was she described, after they hunted these children, there were children and teenagers brought from Drangheta, from the local juvenile detention centers. And these young teenagers were hunted down and killed. And then she witnessed them, their penises were cut off and held aloft as hunting trophies. There was a lot of cheering and waving around, these penises. And she has other instances like that. She even claimed that in a castle near there where they went later, there were plaques on the wall of these embalmed penises, over 200 plaques on the wall. I mean, this whole thing reeks of organized, not just cultic, sick, murderous cultic behavior, but it's very organized and protected by the Belgian army. So clearly it's involving the state and elements within the state and every level of the judiciary and the royal family and that. So that's kind of the extent of it, and that we have from her testimony. There's a lot more details, of course, which will be coming out, but this Drangheta are heavily involved in it. They provide the safe houses, they provide the children and the whole bit.
Now, according to a radical member of the Italian Parliament, Matteo Macceo, the modern mafia, i.e., the same people who run the Catholic Church run the Italian government, so that it's the same people who are running the human trafficking who are running Drangheta. Is that correct?
That's right. They're all a series of old Italian families. Drangheta are not the old Cosa Nostra from Sicily. They're from Calabria, a lot of their founders. And they're kind of the updated mafia, if you like, but they're global. They're much more integrated into, for example, the financial sector. As people know, HSBC Bank was convicted of laundering money for Mexican drug cartels. But JP Morgan, Bank of America, they're all heavily involved in the laundering of drug money, and part of that money comes from exactly these kind of trafficking activities, because these children it's a very lucrative industry, to sell off these children. So where you find the drug trafficking, you always find the human trafficking, and that's actually been quite well documented by international agencies already. Hence, the need to be working with these groups.
Yeah. So could I just read briefly from the ICLCJ, International Common Law Court of Justice testimony of two witnesses, one Antonio Barrero and the other witness number 32. He hasn't still been identified in order to protect him. Number one, from the ICLCJ testimony of Antonio Barrero, and presumably this is part of the testimony on which the court's judgment dated July 18th is based. Quote, "The Catholic Church is clearly the largest baby trafficker in human history, making billions each year by selling Catholic newborns to orphanages, foster agencies, undisclosed party. In Spain alone, 300,000 children were trafficked between 1940 and 1980, reaping over $20 billion. And witness 32 goes on to say, and the present under indictment, Pope Francis himself, this is Pope Bergoglio, organized a marketing of children of more than 30,000 Argentine political prisoners during his stint as frontman for the military junta there in the 1970s and the 1980s. So this points directly to the criminal guilt of Pope Bergoglio for crimes against humanity, child trafficking, and child genocide. Wouldn't you say?
Well, absolutely. And, the testimony of Antonio Barrero was very important. I met with him last month in Barcelona, and we had a series of meetings, including with his network, who have been at the forefront of exposing this, the Spanish situation, which, under Franco, the Catholic Church was actively grabbing the children of Franco's opponents. It helped Franco because they would be raised in these fascist Catholic families and brainwashed to forget about their parents and their political ideas. But it also made the Catholic Church, he claims, between $60,000 and $80,000 per child, reached about $20 billion. Now, their efforts in Spain are being completely blocked because even though they had sympathetic judges, like Balthazar Garzon, the system as a whole stopped it from being adjudicated at all. Right from the top, it was shut off. And it was interesting that King Juan Carlos resigned recently from Spain because, frankly, and I asked Antonio about that when we were sitting in Barcelona talking, he said it's because all the royal families are tied into these trafficking networks, and it implicates the Spanish king as well. And that's almost common knowledge there. And so, I mean, there's all of this evidence on the ground, and the problem is to get a critical mass to force some kind of collapse at the top. And I think that's what we're beginning to see when you look at all of these resignations. I mean, Pachon, the now convicted head of the Jesuits, announced during the trial that he was going to step down as head of the Jesuits at the next Jesuit Council next year. Now, that's never happened again. He's just appointed, and then he's stepping down. It's clearly, related to all of this coming out.
I'd also like to quote, if I could, from a member of the International Common Law Court of Justice prosecutor's office in Brussels, which actually conducted the case against Pope Jorge Bergoglio, aka Pope Francis. Quote, "For every single child-raping priest or baby-dealing nun," baby-dealing nun, that's an interesting concept. There are 10 other people protecting them, greasing the wheels, making the payoffs, to keep it all working smoothly and hidden from view. And Drangheta, the octopus, keeps it rearing its ugly head in this whole business, stated a member. So it's 10 to 1. I mean, it's a huge mafia. It's a worldwide organized crime network that makes billions of dollars, and child trafficking, and along with other crimes, drugs, arms, and child trafficking.
Well, exactly, and that's why you have the proof of that in that how the entire system lines up against anyone trying to find out the truth about this. I first experienced that within Canada around the Indian residential schools at every level when I was getting thrown out of the United Church. Everybody just lined up. That's a sure sign that it's a systemic problem, that everybody knows that if one aspect of it comes out, they're all implicated because they're all doing something to protect. It's written down on paper in the Catholic Church. If you want to stay a priest, you have to cover up child rape or you'll be excommunicated because they don't think it's a crime to rape a child. And they've even said that. Archbishop Robert Carlson in a Milwaukee courtroom said that. He didn't think it was a crime to rape a child. And that's the prevailing mentality. Now, everybody in these systems are expected to support that. So it is exactly as you describe it. And that's why the Pope, in their spin campaign, has to focus on individual cases and say, no, it's just 2%. It's just this aberration that we're going to fix. That's exactly what they've said in Canada about the genocide. There were some bad priests. We've issued apologies and money. Now we're going to fix it all. Everybody go back to sleep. That's the psychological technique when you're facing this octopus, to just look at one tentacle and not the whole creature.
Now, let's go on to another aspect of this judgment that just came down, and one aspect of the judgment is the enforcement action, and that is the sentencing to life in prison and to immediate arrest, and And indeed, and the sworn sheriffs of the court and their affiliated direct action units are ordered to take immediate arrest and imprison the defendants and seize their property and assets. So I'm kind of stepping back and looking at this because, of course, the assets of the Vatican, are you talking about the personal assets of Pope Bergoglio? And
we're talking about the not just their personal assets, because they're not being treated like lone individuals. They are responsible heads of state, heads of churches and corporate bodies. We're talking about the assets of the criminal body. Now, that was the verdict, of course, in the first case when we convicted Pope Benedict. And that, as we just described, it's a criminal organization. It's being declared a transnational criminal body by the court, and therefore all of its assets and property are forfeited. And people can legally seize those. That's the point. You know, one of the aspects in the court decision in this latest case, there's an issue called command responsibility. And this was used in the case against Charles I in 1649. It was used in this case, and that's simply the fact that these men are heads. They're in command responsibilities. There's a quote here. It says, from the court, the trial of King Charles in 1649, quote, "He who does not hinder the doing of evil, if it lies in his power to prevent it, is guilty of it as commander or monarch," unquote. You're guilty of a crime if you don't prevent it. And if your organization is actively doing it with your consent, then the institution's as guilty as you are. And that's really just common sense. I mean, you know, and so this verdict isn't just about their assets, it's about the whole institution. And that's kind of a recapitulation of what was said in the first case about Benedict and the others.
yes, now, could you just set out for us how the sheriffs and the affiliated directed action units will be informed of this judgment and will be briefed as to go about to carry it out?
They've already been informed. There's over 300 of them around the world, mostly in Canada, the U.S., and England. And they have been training for over a month with this stuff. They intend to perform citizen arrests. And they also have documents on them allowing them to deputize existing police to assist them in that. So they're going to literally be going to the Roman police and saying, you are obligated under common law, under this lawful verdict, to assist us in the detaining of Jorge Bergoglio. If you refuse, you'll be considered to have engaged in the obstruction of justice and conspiring with these criminals. Now, politically, and in terms of the public image, for any police force or government to be assaulted like that and say, you've got to assist us, it's going to be very difficult for them to just ignore that. And the point of doing this is to build that groundswell where this action will be inevitable. And we've already seen that. That's the reason why Benedict stepped down. That's why Jorge Bergoglio has canceled recently 3 different speaking engagements and has been floating the rumor of his ill health because they're getting ready for protecting him the way they've been protecting Benedict from arrest. So while people kind of, have been conditioned to think, well, you can't arrest these heads of state, the point is you can, because the whole basis of common law criminal justice is that every person is responsible for their actions. There's unlimited liability for everyone because everybody's under the law, including heads of state, kings, popes, everybody. That's a simple doctrine and truth that we act on, and we intend to do it. It's going to proceed. Whether or not it's successful right away isn't the issue. The point is it's begun, and that precedent had to be established.
Right, and have the defendants been served with copies of the judgment?
That's going to happen within the next 48 hours. There's the citizen arrest warrants that's going to be issued along with the order to comply with the decision of the court and to present themselves for arrest, just like what happened in the first case of Benedict and the other defendants, including Queen Elizabeth, Prime Minister Stephen Harper in Canada, they were all served that order to comply. And people can see that judgment in those documents at ITCCS.org.
Right. Now, along the way in this, toward this verdict, and you and I have discussed this, there have been a flurry of news reports where it talked about Pope Francis suddenly, from being a very, very public person, canceling large public ceremonies, canceling rituals that traditionally have been carried out year after year for decades by the Pope as a matter of ex officio ritual. And not only that, there have been rumors floated here and there saying that the Pope was going to resign. Some of them actually have been traced back to your and my interviews, in which you state that you have spoken to sources within the Vatican who state that the Pope was considering resignation. Now, we don't know if who those sources are. Could you address all, because we had the unprecedented action with Pope Ratzinger of the first papal resignation in 600 years. Could you address the whole issue of Pope Francis? I tend to call it a rope-a-dope strategy, because I think he's a Jesuit. He's an Argentine kind of street fighter. That's how I see him. And he's doing a rope-a-dope strategy, which is that you kind of put yourselves on the rope and you fake people out. So where did all this resignation come from? Could you give us your informed insider opinion?
Yeah. Well, I kind of feel like Bob Woodward, the Washington Post, when the whole Nixon-Watergate inquiry rested on one source that he couldn't reveal, the so-called Deep Throat, which subsequently turned out to be assistant director of the FBI, and who had inside information on Nixon's dirty tricks and the whole bit. For a long time, the media in America were saying, this is Bob Woodward's imagination, and Carl Bernstein, they're just making this up because they hate Nixon. They're saying exactly that about our work now, that, Kevin's just making this up to get at the church, blah, blah, blah. The reality is that, like that situation, there's an enormous truth behind the little bit that's poked up so far. And these are sources not just within the Vatican, but in the political community. Political parties in Italy are all aware of these things because they're on the payroll. The Vatican funds every single political party in Italy, just like they do in most countries in the world. So they have this inside information, and they have shared it with me as far back as 2009 when I first went there and met with Matteo Maceo, senior Italian deputies who were listening to our evidence of genocide in Canada, were very sympathetic. Through their back channels, they have been keeping communication alive now and then. For a while it dropped off. But these are coming from political and Vatican sources both. And that is two things. First of all, the understanding that Pope Francis is, in essence, partly he is what he appears to be, but he's also a hired actor, in the sense that the real power in the Vatican continues to have lied in the hands of Joseph Ratzinger. That's why he's being kept out of the limelight. The cardinals around him continue to hold power, including within the Vatican Bank. A lot of the Vatican money being transferred through German banks, not Argentina, Latin American banks, but German banks to Russia and China. All of this stuff indicates that the power is largely still in the traditional hands, in Ratzinger's hands. At the same time, because he's out there as the posing pope, even though, he's not wearing the papal ring, he doesn't live in the Vatican, he's wandering around by himself, things the Pope has never done in history, right? all of that indicates definite scam going on. But the problem is, enough people believe a scam and becomes true. He's realized that he could be in deep doo-doo now because of his own history and the fact that he's implicated. Now he's convicted of these crimes. Eyewitnesses said they saw him in the Ninth Circle rituals. They saw him involved in killing children. He knows that now. So he was holding that as his way out. You know, this rumoring of ill health and that. I think you will see him now fairly soon resign, or some arrangement made where he's, you know, being withdrawn from the public limelight more and more. I mean, that's the usual way they operate. So, you know, I don't know if that's going to address people's, doubts right now. It really doesn't matter because all of this stuff is going to eventually come out.
Now, there's also the kind of the third rail or the fourth rail of Vatican politics, which is out there, and that's the prophecy rail, which now there are many books out there, and there's even a Catholic theologian which has endorsed the idea, and which is, who has published a book on it, and who's advising his flock and Catholics, what if Pope Francis is the false prophet, this kind of prophesized entity in the book of Revelation, who is the last pope who comes and actually is the one who takes the church down and is the last pope. And he's written a cogent argument about it in Catholic circles, and is answering, cogently to it. It's not, some born again, prophecy kind of fringe or in that field. What do you think about that?
Well, ultimately, I think that a lot of that is just more distraction. It's not about individuals, ultimately, even though, look, we've tried individuals just like they did in Nuremberg, but they were symbols of a whole regime of corruption and crime. And the issue isn't Francis or Ratzinger or who's ever wearing the papal hat at a given moment. The issue is the system they represent and the whole way of thinking that they represent. And that's what's on trial. Now, the whole thing about these predictions of last popes, they don't even have their history right when you look at some of these predictions. It's supposed to be the 122nd pope or something. There's a whole, when you look at papal history, there were at one point in the 14th century, there were 3 simultaneous popes. Those aren't taken into account in the number of 122. There's Pope Joan in the 9th century, who's removed from papal records because she was a woman. When you look at actual papal history, a lot of this is fabricated, and it's used politically by the different factions in Rome and all that. So I would not take these predictions and prophecies literally. That's a big mistake people make, including in reading the Bible. These are, the Book of Revelation was written as a in the politically censored language of the time. They couldn't refer to Rome; they referred to the beast with 7 heads, the 7 hills of Rome, things like that. And even in terms of the discussion of Antichrist, the Antichrist was never seen as a man, but as a place. And that's made clear all through, the Bible and other references to it, that they're referring to Rome, to the institution of the empire, not to an individual. So I really think people need to keep that in mind when they're listening to, the latest prophet on these, or so-called prophets on this whole issue. We're coming from the point of view of guilty institutions and their whole legacy.
Still, but if you look at one of the goals of the ITCCS, or in fact, it may be explicit within the judgments of the International Common Law Court of Justice, and that is the disestablishment of the Vatican and the Roman Catholic Church as a civil institution.
Mm-hmm.
That would, in some functional sense, fulfill that prophecy.
Well, yeah, I guess you could see it that way. I mean, people have accused me of working for the Jesuits because I brought down Ratzinger. Well, I mean, the logic there is kind of odd because we just convicted the Jesuits. So, I mean, it's kind of like this, you can look at it from different angles, and I guess from one point of view that might be true, but the reality is that it's kind of like talking about good and bad Nazis during World War II. You know, we're concerned about this whole thing called Roman Catholicism has been responsible for more murder in human history than any other doctrine, any other institution. And, you know, when I talk to Catholics, I mean, I got a call from a woman in Utah the other day, a very devout Catholic. She said, I hate what my church is doing. I want to help you convict these people, but I'm a loyal Catholic. And I said to her, well, you know, what's happened is flowing from the very ideas that you guys are propagating. It isn't just bad apples. It's coming from a whole way of thinking and being. This whole belief of original sin, the children are damned at birth, you know, that there's a man who can represent God on earth. I mean, all of that leads to everything we're talking about, all these crimes we're adjudicating. So I think people have to, like with any of this, go deeper. And, that's what we found.
Well, taking that note forward, now we have two arms going forward. One is the enforcement arm on the judgment, and the second is the commission, the ongoing commission starting in September. How can people who are sincerely committed contact and help the common law court, the commission, help the sheriffs, the direct enforcement units, etc.?
Well, first of all, our website's ITCCS.org and ICLCJ.com for the common law court. You can write the central body, ITCCS Central @gmail.com. They will then send you to the local, the national groups that are coordinating the sheriff training, the common law groups. There's dozens of these active groups now all over, predominantly in 6 countries. But they will connect you up, ITCCS Central @gmail.com. But also, to give you an example of how this is being applied, within Canada, people are taking this to its next logical step and saying, okay, then we have the power of the Crown of England is nullified. Crown courts are bogus bodies because they're serving a criminal institution. Therefore, a republic is going to be proclaimed this fall. In October, there's a constitutional convention in Winnipeg. And it's that kind of broader action. People saying, well, we need a constitutional basis for common law, which we don't have in Canada or Britain. They do in the United States in the 6th and 7th Amendments of the Constitution. The right to a public common law jury trial is an enshrined sacred right for every American. We need that system in Canada and England and other places too, that these courts are going to have legitimacy. So that's the idea behind the Republic in Canada, and it's flowing directly from these convictions in the common law courts. And so that's what we need people to do, to take action for themselves and their own community, but also see the bigger picture here, that we can't just put a few people away. We've got to change what's caused it. And that's really very encouraging. I'm just really encouraged by the way this has developed so rapidly, actually.
Yeah, yes, just to go further into the Republic of Kanata, I was looking at the Proclamation of Independence of the Federated Republic of Kanata, as well as the articles of the Constitution of the Federated Republic of Kanata. Where can people access these? There's an organizing committee in Winnipeg, and their email is Republic of Kanata, that's Kanata, Republic of Kanata @gmail.com. And they've drafted up this initial constitution. It's very interesting. And one of the things they're advocating is, for example, that the income tax be abolished, that a moratorium be put on all mortgages and debts, that the land and resources and wealth of Canada are put under public ownership, voting age reduced to 16,
this is a very democratic movement, and it's really being driven by a lot of ordinary people. Like one of the people on the organizing committee is this woman. She's a farmer from Manitoba, and she's been leading a one-woman battle to confront the Canadian Revenue Agency, which is like the taxation department, for their policy. And it's actually a policy where they're to defraud people, to have different sets of records. She's discovered that. She's a former CRA employee, and she discovered this, that they have a stated policy of utilizing fraudulent methods to get money from Canadians. This is the kind of thing that's prompted people to say, okay, we got to get rid of this whole system. We need to start from scratch and have a sovereign republic based on common law, not these de facto courts, corrupt, judge-ridden crown courts. So, this is really encouraging. That's how people more and more, it isn't just a few of us doing this now, it's really beginning to spread and getting a reaction among a lot of people now.
Yeah, just looking at this draft, I can see how the Declaration of Independence draws a lot of concepts from the Declaration of Independence of the United States, but adds in the Church of Rome, because you're breaking away not only from the Crown of England, but from the Church of Rome. And you say twice in our history, in 1837 and 1885, Canadian patriots under Papineau, Mackenzie, and Riel fought valiantly but unsuccessfully to unseat the oligarchs of church, crown, and high finance and establish a self-governing republic in which every man and woman was sovereign. So could you talk a bit about that?
Right. Well, it's interesting, really. I often say to people, well, I've got a personal stake because my great-great-great-grandfather, Philip Annett, was a farmer in Ontario, and he actually picked up his gun and tried to overthrow. He got together with William Lyon Mackenzie, and he was part of the assault on the Crown forces in York, which is now Toronto, and they got dispersed, of course. And fortunately, my distant relative survived and he wasn't hanged. But the whole point of that was to say, look, there was a thing back then Mackenzie called the Family Compact, and it was a bunch of Anglican bishops, Crown agents, their buddies who they appointed as judges, and these bankers, and they ran the country. They had like a puppet parliament, very much like the Canadian Parliament now, which doesn't really hold any authority. They were running the country and said, look, that's not compatible with any notion of a democracy. So things really haven't changed in Canada. And the important thing about that is that because that was in place, that's why we had the genocide of so many Native people, because the churches were given carte blanche. They said, do whatever you want. The Catholics in Quebec, the Anglican Church out west in Upper Canada, you can do whatever you want to get the land. And they brought in these laws that caused the extermination of so many Native people. So if we really want to face our genocidal history and not put out these farcical truth and reconciliation commissions where nobody's ever prosecuted for these crimes, if we really want to change and face our genocide, we need to get rid of the whole thing that caused it. And you can trace that to this family compact system that's still running the country. And so this is really a call for people to just carry on what was started as early as 1837 in Canada.
Now, I'm jumping ahead to the Constitution of the Federated Republic of Kanata, and I'm looking at Article 7. It says Indigenous sovereignty. And it says the sovereignty of all indigenous nations within the Federated Republic of Kanata is hereby recognized and safeguarded as part of a constitutionally enshrined union of separate nations. Could you talk about that?
Well, there are precedents to this. Yugoslavia tried it. They had the notion that all these different nationalities should be living in harmony within a federation. That worked for a number of decades. It's even survived Cold War politics. But here in Canada, there's no other way to go except to realize that, instead of patting Native people on the head and say, well, we'll consult you now and then, and they always talk about this when they're about to rip out their resources and land, they say, we've consulted the natives, which means they basically paid off a few chiefs, and the rest of the people can go to hell. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying that Native people have to have the same equality as anybody else, and the only way you can do that is to recognize their nationhood. So, in other words, there'd be the model that was put forward is that within this Federated Republic, there'd be a General Congress that everybody elects, but alongside it is a Council of Indigenous Nations. And any issue involving addressing Native people in Canada would have to get the approval, any of that would have to get the approval of the Council of Indigenous Nations, or it couldn't go ahead. So they, in effect, have veto power over any law in the Republic of Kanata that affects them. And that's very different than what you have now.
Right. And I'm looking at Article 8, Inherent Liberties. And if I could just list a few of them. It says, all citizens of the Republic of Kanata are born and endowed with inherent unalienable liberties under natural law, which cannot be restricted, abrogated, denied, or abolished. These liberties are not limited, etc. Freedom of thought, speech, and expression, freedom of conscience and religion, and freedom from religion, freedom of the press and publication, freedom to organize politically and to form political parties and movements, freedom of dissent, civil disobedience, and non-cooperation with the law and government according to one's conscience and the provisions of the common law, the right to fair, equal, speedy, and responsive treatment before the law, the constitutional and unalienable right to a trial by jury under the common law, the right to bear arms and defend oneself and one's family against arbitrary, cruel, or unjust treatment, including agents of the government, the right to be free from fear, harassment, discrimination, and exploitation, the right to free and unrestricted movement, the right to life itself through free and unrestricted access to all of life's essentials, including healthy food and water, decent medical care, education at every level, public transportation, decent housing, and fair, sustaining, and meaningful employment. Could you comment on these?
Well, I mean, I know it runs the whole gamut, but you can't really have one liberty without the other. I mean, it's fine to talk about rights in the abstract, but people need the right to life. It's really, the whole framework here is that the people as a whole own the country. No private interests do. No group does, no elites. And, further in the Constitution, you'll see that any official in the government of Kanata has no special privilege or immunity. We're doing away with a society based on privilege. That's the whole point. And so, you find that idea right throughout history in the Declaration of the Irish Republic, in the American Constitution, the idea that if you're a sovereign, self-governing man or woman, you don't have authority over you. Okay, you hold that authority in common. And, unless you give it up according to your own consent, but that can't be coerced, it can't be done on the basis of ignorance or fraud or anything like that, which is the way it happens now usually. And so it really flows from that idea of revisioning what the society is. It's not, existing for the elites, it's existing for all of us. We hold the land and our liberties in common, and that's really what's behind every one of those rights that you enunciated there.
And finally, I just want to mention Article 9, Government Structure. The government of the Republic of Kanata shall consist of a Congress of Delegates and a Council of Indigenous Nations. Could you talk about that?
Well, like I mentioned before, it's a way to recognize that we're equal nations. There were many founding nations here, and they all have to have equal power within the new republic. So, it ultimately, the people as a whole hold the power, but we are making allowance for the fact that, for example, the Cree in northern Canada Kanata have a very different situation than people living down near the American border. And they have to have the right to veto any issue that's going to affect them. That's why now, instead of a few deals being signed by chiefs and then the people lose their land to hydro companies, we're taking back the land and saying we have to know that people have that right in order for them to activate that right and say, yeah, this is our land. It always has been. And nobody has a right to sell it out to private interests like that. So it's really flowing from that same idea we've been talking about.
So I'm just reading the last sentence in this Article 9. The Congress must obtain the unanimous approval of the Council, that is the Council of Indigenous Nations before approving any legislation that affects Indigenous people. Well, all legislation would affect Indigenous people. So if you have to get unanimous approval of the council, it's almost impossible to get unanimous approval of anybody. Wouldn't
Sure
this just be a total stall out?
It could. That's the problem of consensual democracy rather than elite-based democracy. It's a longer process.
Yeah.
But the thing to remember here is this is a statement of philosophy. In practice, you'll notice the last article says the Constitution can be amended.
Yeah.
And people are free to bring forward amendments to say, no, we only need 2/3 or whatever. So that's,
right.
Everything can be modified. But the point is, it's important to state what the philosophy is and the perspective. We want equality now. We don't want the domination of indigenous nations. And they have the right to opt out. They can leave the republic anytime they like, which is not the situation now.
So really, if we look not only at the structure of this interview, but at the structure of these developments, that is, the judgments of the International Common Law Court of Justice that have come down in the case of the Crown of England, Elizabeth Windsor, in the case of Pope Ratzinger, and now in the case of Pope Bergoglio, the Jesuit Superior, and the Archbishop of Canterbury et al. That sort of breakdown. And the breakthrough from that is an organic, and all of these cases actually grew out of findings of child genocide through the International Common Law Court proceedings here in Canada.
That's right.
And the breakthrough that has come out of it is an organic breakthrough into the Republic of Kanata. So that's an organic breakthrough process, which we know is how societies organize themselves at a higher level of organization. Do you have any observations on that observation?
Well, it is very interesting the way you put it there, Alfred, because it's come full circle. This stuff started on the west coast of Canada in the late 1990s, really with the first tribunal we organized with UN observers about the Indian residential school crimes that weren't, it's the only independent inquiry that's ever happened into the genocide in Indian boarding schools. That prompted everything that subsequently happened in Canada, including the apology in 2008, all of this stuff. And it led directly to the formation of the tribunal and these common law court verdicts. So I think it's appropriate that it's returning like that to Canada, where, we're leading, in a way, the whole example of what does it mean to set up a society where genocide will not be possible anymore, when these crimes against humanity can be stopped by the people themselves. Because the only way, and I remember this beautiful quote from John Adams when they were founding the Republic in America, and he said, the revolution won the hearts and the minds of the people years before the first shot was ever fired at Lexington and Concord, because the people were already free. They were living on the land. They were often living in harmony with the local natives. They knew they were free, and here were the British coming along trying to impose a tyranny on them. What we find, the people in Canada who get on board with this are in the same boat. They've always considered themselves free. They're not going to let any system stop that. And so unless the people have that within themselves, that's the only way tyranny can be stopped. And genocide happened because people were asleep and they were collaborating. And it still is that way, whether it's chemtrails, whether it's the destruction of our children, our liberties, it's because people are not awake and they don't believe they can do these things. But we're showing them that they can. And it's a way to send that spiritual lightning bolt, if you like, through them to say it's time to wake up and take back who we are.
Thank you so much, Kevin. How can people keep up to date with all that's happening here? Read the judgment, read these studies that we've been referring to, get in touch with you, become involved with the direct action units, find out more, etc.
ITCCS Central at gmail.com. You can write to me, Hidden from History 1, like number 1, Hidden from History 1 at gmail.com, and go to our websites, ITCCS or iclcj.org and iclcj.com. And the important thing is to, when you contact us, you can form a chartered common law group in your community with 3 or more people. And, we issue you a charter. You'll then be authorized to act in the name of the common law court in Canada, the Republic. And just urge people